You ever wonder why some places are abandoned? Not just because they're old, or run down, but because they carry something darker? Something that lingers long after the doors are shut and the lights go out? Tonight, we're going to explore one of those places, St. Mercy's Hospital. A decaying, eerie building, where shadows stretch far beyond the walls, and whispers aren't just the wind, they're memories, echoes of something terrible. If you've ever wondered if a place can remember, stay with me. This is a story that will change the way you look at empty spaces, forever. It was a night like any other, except for the fact that Mark, Lisa, Danny, and Peter had no idea they were about to step into the grip of something that had been waiting in the dark for decades. They weren't just thrill seekers. They were urban explorers, history buffs, with a fascination for the forgotten. Their hearts raced at the thought of walking through crumbling halls, breathing life into the stories that had been buried in time. Their destination was St. Mercy's, an abandoned hospital, perched on the edge of town. The kind of place locals dared not approach. A place shrouded in rumors, unexplained deaths, an inferno that had torn through its east wing, and whispers of something sinister that never truly left. But to Mark and his friends, it wasn't just a hospital, it was the ultimate adventure. They planned their visit on a Saturday night, eager for the thrill. Armed with flashlights, cameras, and that invincible feeling you get when you're young and unaware of the darkness waiting for you. As they stood at the entrance, the hospital loomed before them, like a dark, looming monster, its broken windows, like hollow eyes, staring into their souls. The air was thick with mildew, and there was an unsettling metallic scent in the air, as if the building itself had been bleeding for years. Ready to make history? Mark asked, his voice a mixture of excitement and nervousness, as he pushed open the rusted front doors. They creaked loudly, protesting their intrusion. But Mark wasn't one to heed the warnings. The group stepped inside, and the weight of the building settled over them, like a heavy, suffocating blanket. Inside, the air was damp, and the walls were covered in peeling paint that seemed to whisper as the wind brushed through the cracks. The sound of their footsteps echoed far too loudly in the silence, making it feel like they weren't alone. They decided to split up. Lisa and Danny headed toward the children's ward, eager to explore the remnants of lives once lived there. Mark and Peter ventured toward the surgical wing, curious about the rumors of unsolved deaths and strange happenings. They agreed to meet back in an hour, but in a place like this, an hour can feel like a lifetime. Lisa and Danny walked down the long, winding corridors of the children's ward, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The faded murals of smiling animals on the walls seemed out of place, a stark contrast to the oppressive silence that hung in the air. "This place is giving me the creeps," Danny muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. Her unease was palpable, but Lisa tried to reassure her. "Creepy, but fascinating," Lisa replied, her camera clicking as she snapped photos of the old toys and decaying furniture. "Think about all the lives that passed through here. The stories these walls could tell." They rounded a corner and came upon a room labeled Playroom. Inside, dusty forgotten toys lay scattered across the floor. A child-sized chair rocked gently, as if someone had just left it. Danny's eyes darted nervously around the room, her breath catching in her throat. "Did you see that?" she whispered, her voice tight with fear. Lisa froze, scanning the room. "See what?" Before Danny could answer, a faint giggle echoed through the playroom. It was soft, distant, but unmistakable, a child's laugh. Both girls froze in place, their flashlights trembling in their hands. The sound came again, faint but distinct. "Let's get out of here," Danny whispered, tugging at Lisa's arm. Without another word, the two girls fled down the hall, their footsteps quick and erratic. Meanwhile, Mark and Peter were exploring the surgical wing, moving past rusted gurneys and shattered equipment. The smell of decay hung in the air. Mark found an old surgical mask and held it up with a grin. "Think this would still work?" he joked, trying to lighten the mood. But Peter wasn't laughing. He was staring at a set of doors marked "Operating Theater." There was something about them that felt wrong. Something cold. Something that didn't belong. "Let's check it out," Mark said, pushing the doors open. Inside, the room was vast, with tiered seating for observers. Rusted surgical tools lay scattered across a table. A dark stain spread across the floor, and Peter couldn't shake the feeling that it was something far worse than rust. "Is that blood?" Peter asked, his stomach churning. "Probably just rust," Mark said dismissively, though his voice wasn't as confident as he'd hoped. As they moved further into the room, a cold breeze suddenly swept through, extinguishing their flashlights, with an eerie hiss. "What the hell?" Mark muttered, fumbling with the switch. When the lights flickered back on, they froze. In the far corner of the room, there stood a figure, a pale figure, dressed in a hospital gown, its face obscured by shadows. "Who's there?" Mark called, his voice thick with unease. The figure didn't move. Peter's hand shot out, grabbing Mark's arm. "We need to go. Now." But something told them they were already too late. Back in the children's ward, Lisa and Danny tried to retrace their steps, but the corridors seemed to twist and change, as if the building itself were alive, pulling them deeper into its labyrinth. "This isn't the way we came," Lisa said, her voice trembling. "It has to be," Danny replied, but her tone lacked conviction. The air grew heavier with each passing second. The darkness felt oppressive, almost alive. Their flashlights flickered again, casting the halls in an intermittent darkness. "Stay close," Lisa said, reaching for Danny's hand. But when she turned around, Danny was gone. Her heart pounded in her chest as Lisa called out her name. "Danny! Where are you?" But the only response was the echo of her voice, bouncing off the walls. Then, at the end of the hallway, she saw her. Danny was standing there, her back to Lisa. Relief flooded Lisa's chest. "Danny! Thank God! Don't wander off like that." But as she got closer, something felt wrong. Danny's posture was stiff, too rigid. There was a disconnect in the way she stood, as though she wasn't quite human. "Danny?" Lisa called, her voice faltering. She reached out to touch her friend, but just before her hand made contact, Danny slowly turned around. Lisa's blood ran cold. Danny's eyes were empty, dark, hollow voids that seemed to suck the life out of everything around them. And then, Danny smiled. But it wasn't Danny's smile. It was something twisted, something that didn't belong. Lisa screamed and turned, running as fast as her legs could carry her. The sound of her footsteps echoed in the empty halls, but Danny, or whatever it was, wasn't far behind. Mark and Peter were already heading back toward the entrance when they heard Lisa's scream. Panic surged through them as they rushed toward the sound. They found her near the children's ward, trembling and incoherent, her eyes wide with terror. "We need to leave," she whispered, her voice shaky. Something's wrong with Danny. Where is she? Peter asked, his voice filled with dread. But Lisa only shook her head. I don't know. I couldn't find her. They turned toward the exit, but the hospital seemed to stretch endlessly. Every corridor they entered led them back to the same place. The building had become a maze, a twisted, living thing. The whispers started then. Soft at first, like a distant breeze rustling through leaves, but they quickly grew louder. The voices, familiar, yet wrong, called their names, each one tinged with something dark. Don't listen to them, Peter said, his hands pressing over his ears. But the whispers weren't just outside. They were inside, burrowing into their minds. They stumbled into a room they didn't recognize, a large, circular space, with a massive cracked mirror on one wall. The moment they stepped inside, the whispers ceased. Silence hung heavy in the air. What is this place? Lisa whispered, her voice tight with fear. The mirror seemed to ripple, its surface shimmering, like disturbed water. Their reflections twisted, their faces contorting into grotesque shapes that seemed to mock them. Don't touch it, Peter warned, his voice ragged. But Mark, driven by an invisible pull, stepped closer. His fingers brushed the mirror's surface, and a jolt of cold shot through him. The room plunged into complete darkness. When the lights returned, Mark was gone. In his place stood the figure they had seen earlier, the pale, shadowed figure, with hollow eyes. And it was staring, right at them. Peter and Lisa ran, but no matter how fast they moved, the figure remained, right behind them, always just a few steps away. They burst into what should have been the lobby, but it wasn't. The walls were now lined with old photographs, faded, distorted, and blurred. In the center of the room stood Danny, her back to them. Lisa's heart leapt in her chest. Danny! She cried, but Peter stopped her, grabbing her arm. That's not her, he said, his voice trembling with fear. And then, the figure appeared again, stepping into the room. Its face was a shifting void, and it spoke in a voice that was both familiar and foreign. You shouldn't have come here, it whispered. What do you want? Peter demanded, though his knees were shaking. The figure's answer came as a low, drawn-out hiss. To remember, it said, its hand reaching out toward them. The shadows in the room seemed to come alive, swirling around them. Lisa felt herself being pulled into the darkness, the whispers growing louder, more insistent, consuming her thoughts. And then, everything went black. When she awoke, she was alone in the parking lot, the hospital gone. Only an empty lot remained, overgrown with weeds. Her friends were nowhere to be found, and the memories of that night were shattered, like broken glass. To this day, Lisa avoids speaking about what happened. But sometimes, when she's alone, she hears the whispers, faint but unmistakable, calling her name. She knows the hospital isn't gone. It's still waiting, and it might one day call her back. I wonder what happens when someone else answers that call? Don't miss the next story. Trust me, it's even darker than this one.